I'm hoping the Big Ten has to modify their system for us.
Probably like getting grade 10 sandpaper rubbed on your face every day.
I mean, we say it all the time, whether, there's two types of turds, you're a sinker or you're a floater, but you're still a turd, right? I
mean, we are about players and players playing the plays and not necessarily the plays.
Welcome to the Varsity Club podcast. My name is Derek Peterson. Joining me this week, he's wearing a San Francisco 49ers hat, and I'm not really sure what's going on here. Greg Smith, your favorite recruiting person at Hail Varsity, your favorite YouTube recruiting question of the week person at Hail Varsity. Go watch those videos, by the way. They're excellent. Your favorite Lakers fan, your favorite Michael Jordan hater, apparently your favorite San Francisco 49ers fan. Greg Smith, hello, how are you?
I am very well, and your second favorite podcaster behind you with the Straight Up Breakdown podcast as well. I'm well. I was just letting everything go out there. I'm well. I do like the 49ers. I am not avidly rooting for them at all times, but they have red in their color scheme. I own a lot of red clothes or clothes that match red things. So we roll with the 49ers hat.
That makes sense. Okay. So let me ask you a question then. Would you be one of the people that wears like a New York Yankees hat or an LA Dodgers hat because it goes with your outfit, even if you don't specifically care for the team?
Not if I actively dislike that team. There are limits. There are teams that I would not wear. But for the most part, yes. The Yankees, it's funny you mentioned them because they are an exception. That I would not wear a Yankees hat or like a Cubs hat. Sorry. But no, yeah, it's yeah.
I don't understand.
Definitely teams that I would not rock the Suns. I would not rock a Suns hat.
Even though, I have a good deal of purple and yellow in my wardrobe because of Tottenham Hotspur. I don't think I would ever wear a Lakers hat. I'd wear a Kobe hat, but not a Lakers hat.
Hey, it's hard, even as a very big Lakers fan, it is hard to rock the purple and gold because it's hard to have that go with stuff. And it's an obnoxious yellow or gold when you're just trying to go with it. It's just weird.
Hey,
that color scheme is weird.
Pops of color, man. Pops of color. Black on black. That's right. And then color in your shoes or color in your hat. That's how you do it.
There you
go. I've never understood the Yankees hat thing. Like I see people that don't know a lick about baseball that are wearing Yankees hats, and I'm like, you're wearing this because it's like a fashion statement. And I could ask you like, who's the most famous person to ever play baseball for the Yankees, and you wouldn't be able to even answer that question. So like, take the hat off, please. Greg, I have you on this podcast today to for a fun exercise, and an exercise that surely is not going to make anybody mad, that everybody's going to agree with, that nobody's going to have differing opinions on. I saw a tweet, and I'm going to give him credit because he basically inspired this podcast episode, from a Twitter account called Big Game Boomer. And I see this person pop up on my timeline quite frequently with their like color-coded lists. And in most instances, I disagree with the list, ranging from like, could be better, to like, this whole entire thing is trash, garbage, throw it in the trash can. You got every single thing wrong. Sometimes that happens. They put out a list, top 100 greatest college wide receivers of all time. Shortly after putting out a list, top 100 greatest college running backs of all time. First of all, and one of the things we were talking about on this podcast, or one of the things we were talking about off podcast, was like, when you go to 100, you're just opening yourself up for people to yell at you. Like, just like cap it at 10, just go to 10. And then, you can get creative with it, but you're not going to have everybody on the internet yelling at you. If you go to 100, you're going to put a guy at 95 who people think should be 80, and you're going to have people in your mentions yelling at you. Like, just help yourself a little bit there, unless you want the engagement. If you want the engagement, I mean, this Big Game Boomer account is pretty big. So I guess by all means, go for it. That's where we're at as a sports media climate.
Let's get the engagement by any means necessary.
Yeah. But, to go to 100 and leave off like a guy who won a Heisman Trophy as a wide receiver seems pretty egregious. I'm talking about Johnny the Jet Rogers, who did not land in the top 100. Tyler Lockett is in the top 100.
Jeff Samardzija is in the top 100, man.
I don't know who that is.
You don't even know who Jeff Samardzija is? There's the wide receiver at Notre Dame who actually went on to pitch professionally in Major League Baseball in the Cubs system mostly.
No, see, I'm like looking at like 99 through, because Irving Fryer came in at 100. So he got the Nebraska one in there. I'm looking at like 99 through 85. Like, I know some of these names. Stedman Bailey is on this list. And Johnny the Jet Rogers isn't. Like, what are we doing here? Anyway, so I asked you, I gave you a little bit of homework, and I said, I want your 5 best wide receivers of all time. Yep. And I want your 5 best college running backs of all time. Now, I left this pretty open to interpretation. Best can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. You can go with, one guy that you can go like the Cam Newton route, like one absolutely brilliant season, and then he's off to the NFL. You can go this guy had 8,000 rushing yards in his career. You could go the Jonathan Taylor route. Jonathan Taylor's not on my list, to be clear, but you can do, I left it open to interpretation. You can go whichever way you want. So I just want to dive right into this. Let's have some fun, Greg. We're going to start with wideouts first. Give me your number 5.
Man, this was first of all, let me just say this on the front end. This is really difficult to do. I think it's maybe most difficult on offense to do with wide receivers, given how much things have shifted and changed over the years here with college football, and how much people throw and don't. Because it made me think of that when you were talking about the stats of like this guy had one great year and was off to the NFL versus was able to put together a complete career. And able to go that way. Okay, so with all that being said, as a preamble, my number 5 is going to be Percy Harvin.
Ooh.
I maybe this is biased and it creeped in because of you being a Florida guy, but Percy Harvin was brilliant. And I'm just going to spoiler alert here. I really lean towards on these lists, like just if you had that short, even if it was a shorter burst of brilliance versus the huge longevity, I'm sure there's going to be guys in my top 5 on both lists that did not compile the same stats like in their entire careers that other guys did. But Percy Harvin was brilliant during his time at Florida. So I have him at number 5, and I'd lean towards guys that I think were just really difficult to stop. Like it was really hard to stop Percy Harvin during that time at Florida.
So is it fair to say that your list is going to lean more towards like super explosive, lots of highlight plays, just completely unguardable versus uncontainable, I guess, versus guys that had like 300 catches in 3 years, like they just caught like the Michael Thomases?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which
is one way to do it, which is why it's so difficult to do.
Yeah. 100%. I didn't even think of Percy Harvin.
Oh, wow.
And I grew up watching, like, he was one of my favorite players growing up. Like he was unstoppable. He was incredible. And if he doesn't have injury issues and migraine issues when he gets to the NFL, like he goes down as one of the most electric, entertaining players to play football. Like he's awesome. Interesting. Should we go 5-5, 4-4, or should we get through your list and then?
No, let's go back and forth.
Okay.
You go with your 5.
My number 5 is Justin Blackman, another guy that I grew up watching at Oklahoma State. There are 2 guys that have won a Biletnikoff twice, Justin Blackman and Michael Crabtree. Funny that they both played in the Big 12. Justin Blackman's career stats: 253 catches, 3,564 yards, 40 touchdowns. The team that he played on, where he had like his big, like, I'm the best wide receiver in the country. That team should have gone to the BCS national championship. The field goal.
Yeah, that team was really good. Yeah.
Should have gone. That's the team, right? Yeah, I think that's the team.
Yeah.
14 straight games with 100 receiving yards. He was uncoverable. He was so good. And he was like, it was not in the Percy Harvin mold where, if you get him the ball in space, no one is bringing him down. He was more of like he's down there, throw it.
Right.
Yeah. So good. He was easily one of my favorite players to watch growing up, and he played at Oklahoma State. So it was nice because we were like right there.
Yeah, he was so good. Like, just, yeah, like, and it's tough because he's one of those guys that I feel like even this was recently, that he's already kind of overlooked in a lot of different ways. But also, if you just look through this list, Oklahoma State has 4 guys in the top 31 of this list. Though, man, they were all really good. I don't know that I would put them in the top 31. But Oklahoma State doing work, putting out wide receivers, right?
Well, and this kind of gets at the heart of, like, do you go with like talent or do you go with stats? Because Oklahoma State just throws the ball a ton. And like, you know, like we joked about the Big 12, like, you know, the stigma that the Big 12 doesn't play defense is sort of a stigma because for a while there, like, the Big 12 defenses sucked. They don't suck anymore, but
Right.
you know, for a hot minute they did. They weren't very good. They struggled. They struggled to contain. I mean, we were in an offensive like renaissance era in like the early 2010s, late aughts, whatever it's called. So yeah, like all these Oklahoma State receivers put up just massive numbers. Like James Washington had incredible numbers. He's not in the top 30 wide receivers of all time. No. Yeah, Justin Blackman's my number 5. Who's your number 4?
My number 4 is someone that I always, if you're ever talking college football wide receivers, for me, I'm always going to bring this guy up. I actually had a really difficult time not putting him higher just because there's a few guys that were just like borderline transcendent in college football. Peter Warrick, the wide receiver from Florida State, is a guy that, and I think that this is a little bit of kind of, when I kind of really came into watching a lot of college football was around that time in kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, when Peter Warrick was tearing things up down at Florida State. They win the national championship. That game is also remembered, that national championship game, for really 2 things. One, Michael Vick keeping his team in the game with Virginia Tech against Florida State, and also Florida State having like a 50-year-old quarterback in Chris Winkie. But Peter Warrick was outstanding. And another guy to me that was really just unguardable, that once he got into the NFL, like, he realized that he actually wasn't fast at all. Somehow he was just killing people in college football. I loved watching Peter Warrick play.
So in his career, he had 207 catches for 3,500 yards and 32 touchdowns. Peter Warrick was a guy that just, because I can't help myself, I go through the comment sections on viral posts. I just have to. I just have to. I've gotten better about like not getting myself worked up or like not commenting, but I can't. It's a guilty pleasure. I can't. And people were like, "Why is Peter Warrick 32nd on your list?" For big game.
He shouldn't have been.
As in, he should have been higher.
Oh, okay.
As he should have been higher. I found Bill Conley ranked his top 50 college football wide receivers of the last 50 years. A year or 2 ago, he had Peter Warrick at 12.
Okay.
So, like, you know, you're in that range. You're in that range.
Yeah,
to have him at 32, I just saw a lot of people were like, "What are you doing?" Also, as you were explaining yourself, I had sort of like a what reaction. I don't know if you saw that on the Zoom.
I did see that. I didn't know what that was about.
It was not toward you. It was, I went to his list again, Big Game Boomers. Man, he's getting a lot of publicity on this podcast to see where, to remind myself where Peter Warrick was. And I saw that D.D. Westbrook was at 49 ahead of Chris Carter.
Yeah, right there ahead of Chris Carter in a weird grouping right behind Sammy Watkins.
Yeah.
Like a weird group. Snoop Minnis is 51. Like, every time I look back at the list, I see something else crazy that jumps out to me.
Yeah. Like, Brandon Marshall and Jamar Chase are down at 60 and 58, but D.D. Westbrook is at 49. Like,
yeah, that's weird.
What are we doing? And again, Johnny Rodgers isn't on the list. Okay. My number 4 is Devonta Smith.
Okay. Let me say this real quick. I had a real hard time with him and what to do with him. So I'm eager to hear your explanation.
Is he on your list of 5?
He's not on my list.
He's not. Okay. So, like, there's when you do stuff like this, there's always, you look at like a recent player and you start thinking about him, and then your brain goes, no, it's too recent. No, it's too recent. He's too new. You got to wait a little bit to put him on that list. Like Devonta Smith's career at Alabama, 235 catches, 3,965 yards, 46 touchdowns, a game winner in overtime of the national championship. He like looks like, a dude that you see walking around the street downtown, like
right.
The most unassuming. The most unassuming college. I mean, he's 6'2", so average. Oh Christ, average height, but he was like 160 pounds, and just destroyed the entire sport of college football. 4,000 receiving yards and a Heisman Trophy. I mean, he was very deserving of a Heisman Trophy. Devonta Smith has to be in a top 5. If you talk about the wide receivers that won a Heisman, he's the best one.
I do think that as we continue to, and it's tough because like the recency thing, you do have a hard time sometimes putting guys that are so recent in lists like this. But I don't disagree with anything he said. But I do think that as we get further away from his Heisman win, people will appreciate that season even more. Mm-hmm. Like I think his lure is only going to grow as time goes on.
Yeah, 100%. All right, you're number 3.
On the other side of the spectrum, we're talking about guys that are just completely unassuming, and Devonta Smith, to this guy who's my number 3, Larry Fitzgerald. And is kind of the ultimate example as well of kind of burning bright for a couple of years and then obviously going on for a Hall of Fame career in the NFL. But in his 2 years at Pitt, and I had to double check this because it's just crazy to me, 2 years at Pitt in 2002 and 2003, so keep that time period in mind, he had 161 catches for 2,677 yards and 34 touchdowns. And you can vividly picture the highlights and all of those crazy catches that he was making during that time at Pitt. Like, I think that he is one of the best talents, especially in college, that we've ever seen at the position. And he was deserving of a Heisman his sophomore year as well, when he had 92 of those catches and 22 touchdowns. Like, he was just an incredible player at Pitt.
This is the first time where our lists overlap. Okay. He's at 2 for me. He's one of my favorite football players of all time. He's same. Incredible. He was incredible. To do what he did in 2 seasons was incredible. Almost 3,000 receiving yards in 2 seasons.
That's nuts.
And it was in a time where, we weren't even close to the pass happy offenses that we see now. Like that, we're talking about like an era away. Like, it's not even close.
Right.
And he put up 3,000 yards in 2 seasons. He was awesome. Yeah. Deserving of a Heisman. I agree. My number 3 is Calvin Johnson.
Okay, we're gonna overlap again.
Megatron.
That's my number 2.
Is he your number 2? Yeah. I think, like I was talking about the Bill Conley list that I found, Calvin Johnson's at number 9 with him. Big Game Boomer had Calvin Johnson at number 1. I mean, for his entire career, he just carried bad offenses.
Just Reggie Ball.
2004 to 2006, 178 catches, 2,927 yards, 28 touchdowns. In his time at Georgia Tech, those offenses ranked 89th, 104th, and 54th in scoring. And like,
and had that guy.
And this guy, like, he dragged them like by the scruff of the neck, by the back of the collar to an ACC championship game. So good.
it's such a good player. Like, and those, like, you're right, those teams were not, like, to say that those were average teams. No, those were like pretty bad teams. And it still kind of comes up to this day that, like, Georgia Tech, they weren't able to capitalize more on having him on that team, and then utilize, like, being able to win more games, but then also to continue that going down the road, because they really didn't, and went back to being them. But yeah, he's definitely deserving of being this high, and was deserving of a Heisman.
Yeah, and it's remarkable that that was his, like, college experience, and then he gets to Detroit, and that's his professional experience. Where do you think he sits? Like, just real quick, where do you think he sits all-time greatest NFL wide receivers? Like, is he top 10, top 5?
He's probably top 10. Like, just based off of, like, pure talent, and if, like, we're just doing a draft, like, he's probably top 10.
Like, if he plays for the teams that, if you just swapped situations with him and Randy Moss, is he the greatest receiver of all time? Is he viewed as it?
Maybe.
Yeah.
He would definitely be. He definitely would have a shot. Yeah.
Speaking of Randy Moss, is that your number one?
It is my number one.
Hey.
And I feel like it's incredible. And, like, I'm sure everyone listening to this watched Rand University, the 30 for 30 on him. And when you see that, like, you can, like, even though it was 1997 that season, like, the highlights of him just leaping over guys, taking kicks back, all of the receiving stats. So in 1997 for Marshall, Randy Moss had 96 catches for 1,820 yards and 26 touchdowns. It's incredible, and it is also I can't not also add in that what was supposed to happen was he was supposed to be paired with Peter Warrick, a guy who's number five on my list, on that Florida State team, and not for legal situations, he would have been there, and that team would have just been ridiculous. And so, but all that being said, Randy Moss is number one on my list, and you also would have a hard time convincing me that Randy Moss is not the greatest receiver, period, included, like, NFL as well. Like, I think that Randy Moss is, like, the definition of a special talent. And it's incredible. He was just an incredible player.
You will get no arguments from me. He's number one on my list. He should be number one on every list. The thing that you didn't mention about the 1997 season was that was Marshall's first year at the FBS level.
Yeah.
They were in 1996. They were an FCS team. And he caught 78 passes for 1,709 yards and 28 touchdowns. They won an FCS title. He caught 4 touchdowns in the national title that year. Then they jump up a level in competition. They go to the FBS, and he is better. And then he jumps to the NFL, and all he does is catch nearly 1,000 passes over the course of his career for 15,000 yards and 156 touchdowns. He's the greatest receiver of all time, period.
Yeah. Yes. No argument. No argument.
All right. I think I was expecting the overlap in the top 3. 4 and 5 was where I expected us to differ. I'm so happy that you put Percy Harvin on yours.
I love
Percy Harvin.
Like, so good.
Man. Let's move to running backs now. This one will be fun. I think this one is going to differ a lot, actually.
Okay.
Because I have a 2-time Heisman Trophy winner that's not on my list.
Nice. Okay. I don't know if he's not going to be on mine either. So
okay. All right. Well, maybe we won't differ a ton.
Fine.
Who's your number 5?
Man, this is what, like, kicking this off, like, actually putting them in order is really difficult. And this is maybe the most recent one. We'll see. Derrick Henry goes in at number 5 for me, which gets to be, like, the stand-in, like, Alabama guy, because there's a few Alabama guys that you could have put on this list. But Derrick Henry is really, really good. Like, and a guy that I admittedly thought was just going to be kind of a college, like, kind of not a one-hit wonder, but just like a college star that was really good, won a Heisman there, and then we'll see what happens. He's totally proved me wrong in the pros. But Derrick Henry is number 5 for me.
I have Tony Dorsett. who for a long time had one of the best rushing careers in college football history. As offenses have expanded, I think he's got like 6,000 rushing yards for his career. Yeah, 6,082 and 55 rushing touchdowns. He averaged nearly 6 yards a carry. 4 seasons of 1,000 yards. He had 1,586 as a freshman, which was an NCAA record. Now, at the time that he was playing, freshmen were varsity eligible for only a couple of years. So there's that. But 15,000, only nearly 16,000 yards as a freshman running back is impressive. Especially back then, because you were playing against dudes that, looked like they were 40-year-old men. Right. He had 1,000 yards as a sophomore. Then he had 1,544, including 302 yards against Notre Dame as a junior. And then he had 19,000 yards and won a Heisman Trophy as a senior. Like, they went 12-0. They won a national championship in 1976. Tony Dorsett's my number 5.
It's a good pick. It's hard to argue against Tony Dorsett being on the list. He's not on mine. But my number 4 is I had a really hard time with this guy because he is known as perhaps the best NFL running back of all time. But what he did in college, especially at the time, Walter Payton.
I was going
to go into number 4. Where did you think I was going?
I thought you were going to say Barry Sanders.
Oh, no. But Barry has to be he is on my list. But no, not yet. Walter Payton. So in 1973, Walter Payton had 1,139 yards and 24 touchdowns. He also kicked extra points for Jackson State as well, and their field goals kind of always a fun nugget for me. 1974, he put up another 1,000-yard season with 19 touchdowns, and really was one of the guys that you think about, and it's crazy now because going to Jackson State and then with Jackson State being so much in the news now with Deion Sanders, but a lot of that legacy started then with Walter Payton, and is still to this day one of the first players that you think of when you think about the SWAC and HBCUs in college football. And so Walter Payton, definitely number 4 for me.
Before I give you my number 4, Walter Payton's not on my list. I'm sorry. Before I give you my number 4, did you consider Jim Thorpe?
So here's what happened with Jim Thorpe, and I'm going to be honest here. I'm looking through it. I'm just like, let me make sure I don't forget anybody. I saw him, I laughed, and then I just kept going.
Oh.
I didn't consider him. I think Walter is the furthest back, I think, that I went.
Man played a century ago.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, obviously growing up in Oklahoma, I read about Jim Thorpe a ton when I was a kid. So I've got a soft spot. He's not on my list, to be clear, but I've got a soft spot for Jim Thorpe. My number 4 is Reggie Bush.
Oh.
And this gets into the stats versus just watch the dude and let your eyes decide. He's one of the, give Reggie his Heisman back, first of all.
Give it back.
He's just one of the most entertaining, one of the most talented players to ever play sports. Give Reggie his Heisman back. He's incredible. I love Reggie Bush. I don't have his stats in front of me. I should, but I don't. But I mean, he's not going to.
But also, I'll throw something in here because he's my number 3, actually. And so, part of, to me, what?
I thought I was going to have to sell you on Reggie Bush in the top 5. Okay. I like this.
No. I'm a big Reggie Bush fan. And so part of, to me, what made him so good as a running back is that, and there are other guys obviously on the list that did this, but his ability running the football and catching passes, I think really separates him and puts him in a different tier, I think, in this group. But also, watching when you watch, especially the season, and I should have pulled this up, was it like San Diego State I forget who it was that he had all like 300 total yards in that game against. And you can pick, there's a play where he wants to run side of the field and it comes all the way back to the other and ends up scoring the touchdown that game. There are plays like that feel like they happen on a weekly basis when he was at USC. He was just electric and so much fun to watch on a weekly basis. It made it to where, like, no matter where you were in the country, you needed to watch USC football. He was just incredible. Such a great running back.
Yeah. So in his 3 years at USC, they won 34 straight games and 2 national championships. In 2005, he ran for 1,700 yards. He scored 19 touchdowns. For his career, he ran for 3,200 yards. He also had 1,300 receiving yards. Ended his career, because he was also a return man, ended his career with 6,617 all-purpose yards. There's just
and had another running back, another 1,000-yard running back in the backfield with him.
There are very few players that have had that were like, I mean, he was like he was a cultural icon. It was like a touchstone moment in college football, and there are very few other players that are able to say that about their career.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's my number 4. He was your number 3. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Okay. So I can go to my number 3 then.
Yes, you can.
Okay. I have Ricky Williams.
Okay.
From Texas, which hurts to put Texas running back on the list, but hurts to put anybody from Texas on the list. But I have Ricky Williams from Texas. 3 straight seasons with at least 1,200 yards. In 1997, he ran for 1,900 yards and 25 touchdowns. In 1998, he ran for 2,100 yards and 27 touchdowns. Dude was insane. That's all I have to say about Ricky Williams. Belongs on the list, belongs in the top 5. He's my number 3.
Man, I would have had him top 10, just outside of my top 5. Right along with another guy that I'll save to the end just in case you have him higher. But my number 2 is going to be Bo Jackson. It's really, like, to me, it's like, even though, like, it's funny if people may not realize this, his stats in his college career were actually weirdly up and down. And so in his freshman year, he ran for 829 yards and 9 touchdowns. Sophomore year is where he kind of breaks out with 12,013 yards and 12 rushing touchdowns. And then his junior year, he only had 475 yards and 5 touchdowns. It says he played in 12 games, so I'm assuming that there were injuries there. And then that senior year, he goes 1,786 yards and 17 touchdowns. Man, like you talk about, like, when I started all of this off saying that I've leaned towards kind of unstoppable forces. There may not be a bigger one at running back than him, aside from, the guy that I have at number 1. It's just ridiculous. But Bo Jackson, for me. Plus, we talk about, like, kind of like cultural icons. Like, it's like I still see stuff like from him on Twitter where he's like retweeting, like, oh, like, check my stats, or like stuff like that. Like, he knows how good he was, and it's incredible to me. But Bo Jackson, number 2.
He knows how good he was. Would you say that Bo knows?
I would say that Bo knows.
Bo knows. Is it wrong that I do not have Walter Payton or Archie Griffin or Bo Jackson on my list? Is that wrong? It feels wrong.
A little bit. That does feel a little bit wrong.
It feels wrong. But maybe that's just because I'm 27.
Maybe.
Like some of these guys, I just wish I would have been able to watch live, like, not like have to go through YouTube, like some of these guys. And I think that kind of gets in my decision-making a little bit. In my notes I feel like I have to defend Ricky Williams.
No, you don't have to. I mean,
you got me out here defending a Texas man. Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
In my notes, I have that in his college career, he set 21 NCAA records, including the record for all-purpose yards in a career and rushing touchdowns in a career. At the time when he left Texas, he'd set the NCAA record for rushing yards in a career. He's a 2-time unanimous All-American and the only player in FBS history with consecutive 300-yard rushing games. Unstoppable.
Yeah.
But it feels wrong to not have Bo Jackson and Archie Griffin and Walter Payton on my list. You just like shuddered at the thought. Maybe that was just like my camera like glitching or
No,
like the perfectly timed glitch. You just shuddered at the hearing that I didn't have those three on my list. That was incredible.
At least one of the three. Yeah, that's tough, man. That's tough.
Okay. So we're at your top. You just gave me two, right?
I gave you two. Yeah.
You gave me number two, and it was Bo Jackson. So you only got one guy left.
I do.
And you have not said either of my top two.
I was gonna say there's actually there's a couple of guys that I'm like, man, there's one guy in particular. I'm saving it. That I'm like, man, I don't know how I would have got this guy on the list, but I may have I don't want to say an oversight because the rest of the guys were deserving, but you may have him in your top two.
All right. So this is potentially going to break our friendship. The answer to this next question.
Oh boy.
Is Herschel Walker your number one? Because he's my number two. Is Herschel Walker your number one?
He is one of the two guys that I like struggled most with where to place them, and he is not in my top five. He's not in the number one spot.
All right. So the guy that's in your number one spot should be the guy that's in my number one spot, and we should be able to stay friends if that's the case.
Okay.
Herschel Walker's my number two. Like, Herschel Walker is like, the guy that basically modeled running backs for the foreseeable future. Yeah. Like, I feel like, especially if you go down in the South and talk to guys like, who did you model your game after? It's Herschel Walker. Like, you'll get a lot of Bo Jackson. And you'll get some of the newer Alabama guys. Like, you'll probably get a bunch of guys that say Derrick Henry. But if you go talk to guys that, love football, have watched football, students of the game, things like that. Like, you talk to players about, who are some of your greatest players of all time, or your most favorite players of all time. You're going to get Herschel Walker a ton. 5,000 rushing yards in his career, 52 touchdowns. He averaged 159 rushing yards a game. Herschel Walker is just like, he's like the gold standard for running backs. He's at number two on my list. And yet he's not on, I say all that and he's not on your list.
He's not. And he was one of two that I'm really nervous about having not put on my list. And now I'm actually nervous about if we have the same person at number one. I actually
hold on. One more thing about Herschel Walker, because I just pulled up his numbers in front of me. 1,600 rushing yards as a freshman or his first year, 1,891 yards and 18 touchdowns the next year, 1,752 the year after that. The gold standard for running backs. All right. But he's number two. He's number two because the guy that I have at number one, the greatest season of all time, will never be touched, will never be topped. It was the greatest rushing season of all time.
Toby Gerhart. I'm sorry.
Who's your number one, Greg?
It's Barry Sanders.
Okay, man. Thank you.
It has to be Barry Sanders.
I was so concerned. I was so concerned.
Listen, 2,628 rushing yards, 37 rushing touchdowns. But I just don't know what you're supposed to do otherwise than to put Barry Sanders in the number one spot. Like, I feel like, as you and I both agree that Randy Moss has to be always in that number one spot at wide receiver, I feel like Barry Sanders always gets that for me at running back. Like, it's just, that one's an easy choice. Like, that was the easiest choice of all, to put Barry Sanders in the number one spot.
Yeah, I started my notes and I lined it out 1 through 5 wideouts, lined it out 1 through 5 running backs. I wrote Barry Sanders 1 in running backs and then went back to start working on the wide receivers and work my way down. Like he's just easy. Let me read you his game log from 1988. And maybe people don't care about this, but this is incredible to me. 18 carries for 178 yards in the opener. He returned the opening kickoff of the first game of the season, 100 yards for a touchdown. Next game, 20 carries for 157 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. He also had a 61-yard punt return for a touchdown. Against Tulsa on October 1st, 1988, he had 33 rushing attempts for 304 yards, 5 touchdowns, broke the school record for yardage. Next game, 24 carries, 174 yards, 4 touchdowns against stupid Colorado Buffaloes. Against Nebraska, they lost by 21 points. And he had 35 carries for 189 yards and 4 touchdowns. And they lost by 21 points.
That's incredible.
This is insane. 25 carries for 154 yards and 2 touchdowns against Missouri. 37 carries for 320 yards and 3 touchdowns against Kansas State. 39 carries for 215 yards and 2 touchdowns against Oklahoma. 37 carries for 312 yards and 5 touchdowns against Kansas. 32 carries for 293 yards and 4 touchdowns against Iowa State. 44 carries for 332 yards and 4 touchdowns against Texas Tech in Tokyo.
Wow.
And then he had 29 carries for 222 yards and 5 touchdowns, which is a Holiday Bowl record in the Holiday Bowl. They beat Wyoming 62-14. This man carried a team.
And
There is never going to be a season like this. 44 rushing attempts against Texas Tech, 332 yards. He went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight games with at least 32 carries. Imagine giving that to a running back in today's age.
I'm imagining like that run like in today's football with social media and like all the shows and all of that stuff. Like think about how much everyone would be talking about that.
Yeah. He had 4 games with at least 300 rushing yards. There's just never going to be a season like this ever again. No.
That's incredible.
He's awesome. I'm glad. I'm glad we agreed on number 1. Now I don't feel as bad for leaving off like Bo Jackson and Walter Payton because you didn't have Herschel Walker on your list.
Yeah, there we go. That evens out.
Okay.
Did you have Adrian Peterson on your list?
No.
Okay, so like that was the one along with Herschel Walker that I had the most difficult time with. Like that, it was tough. And there's some other guys too that are just like I don't know what to do. Like I never know what to do with LaDainian Tomlinson as like at TCU. Like right, like it's like really tough to, or like Emmitt Smith at Florida, like because the reason I say those two specifically is because I feel like we think more about them as pro players than we do as college players. They were so great in the NFL and while they were good, obviously in college, and I'm sure both of them hold like multiple school records and stuff. Like I just don't primarily think of them as college football guys versus pros, so that played into it as well. But yeah, Peterson and Walker were really tough for me to do anything with. I didn't know what to do with them.
If we had dropped this to 10, I would have had Archie Griffin. I would have had Bo Jackson. I would have had Walter Payton. I don't know that I would have had Adrian Peterson on mine.
Okay.
Even in the top 10.
Or like Marshall Faulk.
I'm not an Oklahoma homer.
Okay.
I'm not a homer.
My bad. I don't know. Maybe you would have put whoever Steve Owens is in the group.
As I spent time talking about Jim Thorpe earlier in this podcast.
Right. But there's also, some of the things too with like some of these recent, like the really recent running backs, like Saquon Barkley. Like I wonder, like once we get maybe
he's
like 5 to 10 years from now, where he's gonna go, like be at.
He's the perfect talent versus production.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because like him versus like Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah. Like I thought about Jonathan Taylor because I'm like,
yeah, so did I.
We had like 8,000 rushing yards, something absurd like that. I thought about, but I'm like, no. Wisconsin runs it 82 times a game. No.
Right.
But then again, like we talked about Barry Sanders, like carrying an offense, it just, I don't know. It just feels
that's different.
It feels a little different now.
Yeah.
I'd be curious.
There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Wisconsin running backs on here, and then Jonathan Taylor is at 6. Sorry, there's 6 Wisconsin running backs on this list. That's to your point that Wisconsin running backs, man, like Oklahoma State wide receivers.
Are you talking about big game boomers list?
Yeah.
So you've got Ron Dane, you've got Monty Ball. Sorry guys, you've got Alan, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm not going to butcher it. You got Melvin Gordon. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I don't see Jonathan Taylor on here.
No, he's 38 on their list.
I'm sorry, he's 38? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. He's right behind Red Grange.
Okay, he's right ahead of LaMichael James.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about LaMichael
Steve
James.
Slayton. Man,
I wanted to talk about LaMichael James. Like, okay, this might be the other like perfect like talent versus like LaMichael James is one of my, he's like with Percy Harvin, it's like one of my favorite players of all time. Like what LaMichael James did at Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at him in person, he looks like me. Like no disrespect to LaMichael James, he's like my size.
He's a small guy. Yeah.
I've been in the gym. I can say that. It's not going to be disrespectful to Michael. I've been in the gym. But he looks like me. It was just incredible what he did in those offenses. He's one of my favorite, but I obviously couldn't put him in a top 5 with some of the guys that we talked about, especially if I'm going to leave off like Bo Jackson.
Yeah. Bo Jackson is on.
The other piece of homework that I gave you that you just decided not to do was I wanted to ask you, like, if we limited this conversation, greatest of all time, to just Nebraska players, which wide receivers and which running backs you would pick. You decided you just didn't want to do that. Your phone decided it just didn't want to receive that text message. So, like, I guess it works because we're pushing up on your hard outs. We're not going to have a ton of time to get into this. Yeah. But, like, Lawrence Phillips gets left off Big Game Boomers top 100 running backs. And Lawrence Phillips is a really interesting discussion. Maybe we have to save this for another day. But like, if you asked me to rank the top 5 Nebraska running backs of all time, I might put Lawrence Phillips second. And I would ask you, if he doesn't get suspended, does he win a Heisman Trophy in 1995?
Yeah, I think so. If he plays every game and he plays like the snaps that he would have played, even though they're blowing people out. Yeah, I think he does.
So I've got Mike Rozier 1, obviously Lawrence Phillips 2. I have Amir Abdullah at 3 ahead of Amon Green, and I have Rex Burkhead at 5. Do you have any complaints with that grouping?
I would flip Amon Green and Amir Abdullah.
That's the thing, like,
which is the only thing. Yeah, man,
pretty much everyone does that.
But it's really hard. I don't want to, like, the thing about it is that Amir, you talk about like a guy who was on a okay to pretty good team and was the guy on those teams. Like talent, I don't know. That's a really tough one. But I do think I like Green in really, really high regard. So I probably will flip those two. I
mean, like, here's another situation of a guy like carrying an offense. Like if you look at Abdullah's numbers next to Green's numbers all time, or in terms of their career, Amir Abdullah had 813 carries. Amon Green had 574. He averaged like 7 yards a carry, and on like 240 fewer carries, he had more touchdowns than Amir Abdullah.
That's incredible.
So like, yeah, like he should probably be 3. I watched Amir Abdullah though. And if he's like fully healthy for his senior season, like he's maybe Nebraska's all-time leader in rushing yards. Still finished pretty close.
Yeah.
Nebraska wide receivers.
I mean,
would you put, I feel like this is a stupid question. Would you put Wandel Robinson in the top 5? If we're talking about best, this is the, would you put him in your top 5?
Yes. Yeah. I would put him in the top 5. It would make people mad. But if we're just talking about best wide receivers in Nebraska history, I would put him in the top 5.
If he has the season that he had at Kentucky, at Nebraska, and then goes to the draft, and I understand this is not, like, people probably don't want to hear this as a hypothetical. I'm just curious about it. Curious about what you would say. If he had the season he had at Kentucky, at Nebraska, is he viewed as the better Nebraska wide receiver over Johnny Rodgers?
No, because of the way people feel about Johnny Rodgers and what he means to people around here. So there's that sentimental value, but B, because of the Heisman.
Yeah, he won a Heisman Trophy. Yeah.
You're just not gonna get that. Yeah, that's probably the first and foremost. But also there's some real sentimental value there. So yeah, no, he'd be 2. I think 2 would be the ceiling there.
Also, like the thing with some of the newer guys, like if he had the season he had at Kentucky, at Nebraska, how many games would they have won? Maybe they're 6-6, but they're not. I mean, like the teams that Johnny Rodgers, the teams that Johnny Rodgers played on, like he had insane production and they won football games. Like that's the difference. Johnny Rodgers would be 1, obviously. Again, he should have been on Big Game Boomer's list. He should have been on the list. To not have him in the top 100 when he should sit in every single person's top 50 is insane. Anyway, Jordan Westerkamp 2 or Irving Fryer 2?
Irving Fryer 2.
Okay. Kenny Bell in your top 5, yes or no?
Ooh, no.
Okay. Stanley Morgan in your top 5, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. I put it in my notes. I feel like people are going to yell at me over this. Johnny Rodgers, Jordan Westerkamp, Irving Fryer, Kenny Bell, Stanley Morgan.
Okay. No JD Spielman.
No JD Spielman. Serious consideration given to Nate Swift.
God, I love Nate Swift.
Right?
He's so good.
Okay. Well, you got to get out of here. So I'll let you go. Thank you for coming on the podcast and doing this. This was fun.
It was great. Thank you for having me.
My boy Percy Harvin got some love. Twitter account that we spent the entire podcast roasting got a bunch of publicity. Now everybody's going to be going to that account. We'll be back next week with another podcast. In the meantime, keep reading hailvarsity.com. Go to hailvarsity.com/subscribe. Make sure you sign up for the magazine and for Greg Smith's premium content. You don't want to miss it. Make sure you're subscribed to Greg's Straight Up Breakdown podcast that he plugged in the beginning. Make sure you subscribe to all the Hail Varsity podcasts. This is a proud part of the Hurrdat Media Network. Shouts to Cam for producing this episode every week. Shouts to you guys for listening. Shouts to Greg for coming on and doing this, and for having Barry Sanders, the rightful number 1. We'll be back next week. Thanks, guys.
A Hurrdat Media Production.